Welcome to the CERAWeek podcast, where the world's energy leaders and innovators share insights on the future of energy, technology, and climate. I am Atul Arya, Chief Energy Strategist at S&P Global. In each episode, we dive into the critical issues and bold ideas shaping our energy future. So let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to CERAWeek podcast. I am Atul Arya, Chief Energy Strategist at S&P Global. And today it is my great pleasure to welcome Professor Jun Arima, Chief Sustainability Officer at JOGMEC. JOGMEC is the Japan Organization of Metal and Energy Security. He's also a visiting professor for graduate studies of public policy at University of Tokyo, and he serves on many boards, has written extensively about climate change and energy transition, and it's fantastic. It's a great pleasure and honor, Professor Arima, to have you with this podcast. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Let me start, Arima-san, by just talking about the situation in Japan. Very important. I think people forget it's a very large economy, also a large consumer of energy and emitter of greenhouse gases. So last year, Japan published the 7th Strategic Energy Plan, I think around this time last year. So what were some of the major shifts from the previous plans and why?
Okay, thank you very much. And I'd like to highlight a couple of things. First, the most recent energy plan is the much stronger power demand will rise premise compared with the 6th energy plan. And second, a big difference is finally it has removed the post-Fukushima phrasing about reduction of nuclear dependence as much as possible. And as a result, it is pursuing a maximized use of both renewable and nuclear for decarbonized power source. And another thing I'd like to highlight is it is much more security-driven compared with climate-driven, compared with the previous energy plan. So as a result, it is not ruling out the possibility of underachievement of the climate goals because of the slow pace of cost reduction of various cleaner technologies such as hydrogen or battery or CCUS and renewables. Of course, we are pursuing the 3E plus S, namely energy security, economic efficiency, and environment plus safety. But if energy security is under risk, then we would prioritize energy security. So that kind of message is very much clear in the most recent energy scenarios.
Why was you said the demand is higher. Why was the demand, what is the reason for that increase in demand?
It is as a result of AI and DX and GX and so on. Previous energy plan, of course, factored in certain increase of the energy demand, but the electricity demand increase is much more steeper than expected. That is quite common outlook by various research organizations. So we have factored in order to respond to higher power demand, we have to make sure that the large amount of decarbonized power source needs to be prepared. Renewable is, of course, very much important, but that will not be sufficient. We need a very much stable and reliable power supply from the large decarbonized power source, namely nuclear. So therefore, we are prioritizing restarting of nuclear, plus, if appropriate, we would also consider construction of the new nuclear power plant.
In this new plan, is the commitment to reach the net zero, which was set up several years back by one of the previous prime ministers, is that still there? Is that correct? And then will there be some particular policy measures taken, technologies? How do you see getting there? And do you think it will get there?
Good question. First of all, we are retaining the current target, a long-term target, decarbonizing Japanese economy by 2050, net zero emission by 2050. We have published a new NDCs that is 60% by 2035 and 73% by 2040, leading to net zero emission by 2050. This is very, very ambitious scenarios. And to do that, we need to do many, many things. First of all, a decarbonized power sector by maximum introduction of renewable and nuclear. As I said before, restarting nuclear is very, very important because that will supply zero emission and stable and large amount of power supply. And also renewable scale up needs to be backed by grid reinforcement and also interconnections and also flexibility such as storage and demand response. But that is not sufficient. We also need electrification of, for example, the transport sector and other sectors. And also we need to make a maximum introduction of promotion of energy efficiency on the demand side. And finally, we need to address how to abate sectors. So by utilizing such technologies as CCUS and carbon removal and so on. In short, these are very, very challenging pathways. And the one caveat is we need to be honest about cost and timelines and avoid assuming away constraints. And a seventh plan explicitly positions hydrogen, ammonia, and CCUS as key thermal and hard to abate sectors. But if these technologies are too expensive, then the achievement of net zero by 2050 would be extremely difficult.
I think you put your finger on one of the big challenges, isn't it? This hard to abate. But let me flip it around because you have been working on in this area for a long time. Isn't it Japan which will have to take the lead for the rest of the world to
Mm,
follow? Because people should remember Japan is a very
mm,
industrialized country. You
mm,
make steel, automotives, petrochemicals. So those are all hard to abate
mm,
sectors. And if Japan can take the lead and use the technologies you
mm,
just mentioned, and that would be a signal for rest of the
mm.
world it can potentially follow. Do you see kind of that happening down the road? We're talking, long time into the future,
Yes,
perhaps, but still.
and definitely Japan would like to make utmost contribution to the global decarbonization through its technologies, because I believe Japan is a technology-oriented country. But in order
Yeah,
to say
exactly.
have those technologies, we need to have solid manufacturing industry in Japan. So we need to
Uh-huh.
prepare the enabling environment for manufacturing industry in Japan. If energy cost is too expensive, then there is a real risk of industrial carbon leakage or relocation
Yeah,
industry to
exactly.
the other country. On
Yeah.
one hand, we need to pursue maximum introduction and promotion of decarbonized technologies. And to do that, we have introduced a GX strategy, and by issuing a so-called GX bond of 20 trillion Japanese yen. And we are providing various subsidies and also incentive money to industry so that they can develop carbonized technologies. And we are gradually introducing carbon pricing, but we would like to avoid the adverse impact to Japanese economy or Japanese manufacturing industry. And also, we need to bear in mind that Japan is just 3% of the total emissions of the world. So therefore, Japan's role is to disseminate those technologies to neighboring countries such as ASEAN. So that is why
Yeah.
Japan is pursuing a so-called ASEC, Asia Zero Emission Community idea very vigorously, involving 11 countries. And the main mission is how to disseminate those advanced technologies to those neighboring countries. And those countries are very much the big contributor of the incremental CO2 emissions in the coming decades.
Mhm.
So if we can
Mhm.
deliver those technologies to those countries, then we can avoid increased emission in those countries. Then we can make the very valuable contribution to the global mitigation.
So this is like the Asian Zero Emission
Mm.
Initiative. That includes both money as well as
Yeah,
technology going into these
and it
countries.
is very much project oriented and also involving many
Okay.
Japanese private sectors. So many Japanese private
Uh-huh.
industries or the organizations have signed MOUs with their counterparts from 11 Asian Pacific countries. And it is backed by various the policy incentives such as the export credit or JOGMEC loans and so on. So both money and technology include not only the complete zero carbon technologies, but also low carbon technologies such as ammonia or hydrogen and so forth. Because knowing
Yeah.
that in those countries, fossil fuels will still play a very much important role in their energy mix. So we cannot
Yeah.
change their energy system overnight. So therefore, we need to consider how to reduce CO2 footprint, for example, in a coal power plant or gas-fired power plant. So for this
Yeah.
purpose, we are very much promoting the idea of transition finance and transition technologies, acknowledging the energy reality in those countries.
They will use fossil energy. So, what is your view? You've been working on around climate issues for a long time. How do you see this net zero around the world?
Mm,
Different time
mm,
frames, different
mm.
pathways. I mean, by 2050 or even
Yeah.
2060, 2070. not feasible,
Mm.
right? But what's your kind of vision?
Yeah, in the climate debate, international community is still very much, how can I say, obsessed with 1.5 degree
Let's
and
say that.
2050 carbon neutrality. And we hear that kind of mantra many, many times in the climate negotiation. But to be frank, 2050 carbon neutrality is pie in the sky to my mind. Developing countries are not on the same page in their devotion to carbon neutrality by 2050. And for emerging
Yes.
economies like China and India and other emerging economies, economic growth is much, much more important. And they are not committing to absolute emission reductions right now. Given that situation, 2050 carbon neutrality will not be achievable. But if the world is gradually going towards low carbon future and eventually zero emissions, I'd like to say I'm optimistic about the long-term future. But in order to do so,
Mm.
the pathways needs to be durable and also sustainable, not only
Yes.
environmentally, but also socially and politically. And what we have
Yes.
learned in the recent 2, 3, 4 years is first, people are very much keen on affordability, not only in developing countries, but also in developed countries. For example, in Japan,
Yes.
we have removed the special tax for gasoline for the sake of, the inflation abatement. But it is something like a negative carbon tax, right? The consumers very much do not like the increase of energy cost. So we need to acknowledge that affordability issues. And also, the climate issue is not separated from geopolitical tensions. If we are pursuing clean energy transition in line with, for example, NZT scenarios by the IEA, then that will substantially increase the demand of critical minerals. Then critical mineral will face another the security problems and too much high dependence on a single country. So therefore, the decarbonization will definitely reduce dependence on fossil fuels. That will create another kind of economic security problems. All in all, we cannot be free from geopolitical issues. So we need to also factor in those constraints. Again, I believe that the global community will go towards low carbon future and zero carbon future, but that will not be as quick as envisaged in NZT scenarios, and the pathway will be much more messier.
Let's go deeper into the nuclear
Mm,
power because that's so interesting
mm,
and important. And when you refer to the nuclear in Japan, how much effort do you think is needed to kind of really restart old plants, maybe build some more new plants you mentioned, perhaps SMR?
mm,
What will it take to revive the nuclear power? First, let's just talk about
mm,
Japan. And I'm also wondering, do we have enough people
mm,
who still know about nuclear
mm,
technology to work in the nuclear
mm.
sector? So, number of challenges.
Yeah, many, many challenges. In the case of Japan, first of all, the Japan's nuclear revival face approximately three categories of constraints. The first category
Uh-huh.
is societal and political trust. After Fukushima, the core issue is not only engineering, it is confidence. The trust
Yes.
in governance and also trust in operators, transparency and emergency preparedness, and so on. And the seventh plan itself emphasized that Fukushima experience remains the starting point. The second constraint is regulatory, legal, and siting realities. And research require meeting stringent safety reviews. A litigation risk is real, and so local consent process take time. So even where national policy supports restarts, the pace is determined locally. So that is the second challenge. And the third challenge is economics and industrial capability. Large new builds, capital incentive, intensive, and also schedule sensitive.
Yes.
Japan must rebuild supply chains, project management capability, and a durable financial model, and while managing back-end issues. So these are the multiple challenges. I think it is a good start that the most recent energy plan emphasized the role of nuclear,
Perfect.
and they for the first time said they'd like to promote maximum introduction of nuclear and renewables. But that needs to be backed by strong political will by the government.
Yeah. How is the public, when you, the first point you made about the
Mm.
trust, from the time of
Yeah.
Fukushima to
Mm.
now, how is that change? Is it coming back up?
Not surprisingly, immediately after Fukushima, the majority of the opinion poll
Yes.
suggested that the majority of Japanese population do not support restarting nuclear. But
Yes.
gradually, the support for restarting nuclear is increasing, And now the people supporting restarting nuclear is much more than people objecting to the restarting. And that must be reflecting the energy reality and also increase of energy cost and also the increasing
Cost.
concern of energy security and so forth.
So let's see where it goes. How about the rest of the world? There's a lot of
Mm,
interest in
mm,
nuclear here in the United
yeah.
States, but also elsewhere. France,
Mm,
as you know, and
mm,
China and
mm,
India. Do you think nuclear can come back? If you go back to the early days of
mm,
nuclear, it was growing, it was becoming a bigger part of the global
mm,
mix, but then it has been steady and then
mm,
declining with shutdown in Japan and in Germany and
mm.
so on. So do you see a new golden age of nuclear coming?
I don't know whether we can call it as a golden age of nuclear, but definitely nuclear is coming back to the energy mix in the global energy scenes. I think it's coming back is a bit patchy across the countries. In the OECD economies, in the countries where there are a large fleet of nuclear power plants, they have to first consider extending a lifetime and maximum use of existing nuclear powers and also introduction of nuclear reactors. Perhaps I think that be led by emerging economies like in China. I still remember that in the COP28 in Dubai, many countries gathered and they committed tripling nuclear capacity by 2050. And the following year, there was a nuclear summit in Brussels, and many countries also joined. So I think their enthusiasm to nuclear is real. The share of nuclear out of total power generation, that would be around, say, 10% plus or something like that, because renewable is also making more and more contribution to the zero emission power sources. I think as a reliable and stable power supplier of zero emission power, nuclear will definitely play a role. There have been strong enthusiasm towards renewables, but it is increasingly becoming evident that renewable alone cannot make the pragmatic carbonized power systems. So that needs to be coupled with the stable zero emission sources like a nuclear. So that is why such countries as UK, France, Netherlands, Belgium, Poland, and so forth, they are revisiting nuclear issues.
We are seeing the same here in the
Yeah,
US, as you know, really driven by the significant growth in power demand from
yeah,
hyperscalers. And they are in such a rush. They want to fund everything, right? They want to be able to get as much
exactly.
power quickly, though nuclear is not going to
Mm.
happen in the short time frame.
Nuclear could be a possible area for US-Japan collaboration because we can say
Yes.
jointly engaged in a development of say advanced nuclear reactors, including SMR and so forth. Both of us are very much keen on utilizing nuclear power options.
Very much so. So we will look forward to that conversation at
Yeah.
CERAWeek. I want to switch gear a little bit and put your big climate change hat. You've been working on the issues for a long
Mm.
time. How do we get more money? I mean, Japan is doing
Yeah.
its share
Mm.
of getting more money into the emerging markets, developing
Mm.
economies. But the commitments, and you remember the Paris commitment and all, has been very slow meeting those
Mm.
targets. How do we get more money? Is it because they're not good projects, or is it the countries need to become a bit more
Mm.
generous, or what or capabilities are out there in the economy, EMDs?
Yeah, that is the most challenging part in the current climate debate because developed countries
Mhm.
say demanding more and more ambitious targets, and developing countries are more and more ambitious, say, delivery of climate finance from developed countries. And first of all, the public money alone cannot solve this problem. In order to say decarbonize energy systems in 2040 and 2050, several trillion US dollars would be needed. And public money alone cannot fill that as such a big requirement. So private money needs to be mobilized. But in order to do so, we need to first reduce risk and we need to ensure bankability currency risk hedging or political risk insurance or credible offtake contracts,
Mhm.
and also, last but not least, stable regulatory regimes in developing countries would be absolutely necessary.
Yes.
And also, we need to consider
Mhm.
blended finance and concessional instruments utilizing grants and guarantees and first loss tranches that crowd in private investors and so forth. So, in order to maximize the inflow of private money, and also, we need to consider realistic technology set aligned with local constraints. So not only zero carbon technologies, but also transition technologies need to be factored in. Having said that, whether or not we can mobilize such a huge amount of money to climate, I cannot be optimistic because international
Yeah.
community are facing many challenges, development challenges, and climate change is
Yes.
not the only challenge faced by developing countries. And we know that 17 SDGs, there are, say, synergies and also trade-offs, but it is clear that we cannot devote all the available financial and human resources to SDG 30 only. So there could be some competition among various SDG goals like poverty eradication. To some extent, I have some sympathy to the argument poverty eradication should come first in order to, say, address
Yes.
climate change properly.
Yeah, as you say, there is competition, with other sustainable development goals, SDGs, but there is also synergy
Yeah.
as well, isn't it? Like if you do something good, particularly not necessarily
Mhm.
climate change, but providing
Yeah,
energy, and if that's
indeed.
clean
Yeah.
energy, and that helps with health and
Yeah,
poverty, and as well as addressing the
exactly.
climate change, isn't it? So we have to think in a different
Mm.
way about how to move the ball forward. What do you think?
Yes, the typical synergy is if we increase renewable and also zero carbon technologies like nuclear, then that will reduce the dependence on fossil fuels. Then that will also contribute to lower CO2 emissions. So clearly, there is a synergy between energy security and climate mitigation. And on the other hand, the trade-off could be if we increase penetration of, say, bioenergy, then typically there could be a conflict between food production and also bioenergy production.
Exactly. Yes.
We need to, say, consider that kind of trade-off as well. And also, if we maximize utilization of the EV or battery or, say, cleaner technologies, as I said, that could increase the demand of critical minerals. Then critical mineral production increase could, say, potentially damage environment in the neighboring community. We need to, say, consider multiple challenges and maximize synergies.
Before we wrap up, a couple of questions. You have been working in the
Yeah,
climate change and
yeah,
IPCC, things like that, for a very
yeah.
long time, from what I see. So tell our audience, what have you learned and what's your view about the future? The news seems to be kind of depressing
Mm.
at times, isn't it? But I'm interested in your thoughts on your reflections for after all these years of looking at it, studying both the science and the policy of climate
Yeah,
change.
and my biggest lesson is that our current policy succeeds only where it is built on not only environmental, but also social and political sustainabilities. So public support,
Mhm.
industrial feasibility, and credible economies would be absolutely necessary. If policies raise costs sharply without visible benefits, backlash is inevitable, and the policy swings become destabilizing. And a second lesson I have learned is geopolitics is now inseparable from decarbonization, such as supply chains and
Yes.
critical minerals and industrial policy and energy security shape what countries are willing and able to do. My outlook about the Paris Agreement achievement is cautiously pragmatic. Technology progress is real, but the transition will be messier, more diverse, and more contested than many scenarios assume. The key is to keep policies grounded in reality so that progress is sustained over decades.
Yeah, so you're not giving up yet,
No, not
I
yet.
hope. So, my last question for you. Do you think the world can achieve the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement? I presume you were there when that agreement
Mm.
was
Yeah,
signed. Were you in
yeah.
Paris? You were there, so you have some relationship to that. What is your view of
Yeah,
that?
if the question is strictly about limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius goals, then I think the world is
Mhm.
on a very difficult path. And to be more frank,
Yeah,
that will not be achievable. But if the
yes.
question is whether we can still achieve deep decarbonization consistent with Paris' direction of travel, the answer can be yes. Through practical policies that scale clean investment and accelerate grid and permitting, and so deploy a broad set of technologies, including renewable, nuclear, CCUS, and low carbon fuels where needed. So the decisive factor is not ambition statement, it is delivery. So especially in fast-growing emerging economies where future demand and emissions will concentrate and where capital costs and risk are highest. That kind of pragmatic view is necessary, but we should never give up our ambition going towards low carbon and eventually zero carbon future.
We have to be ambitious, but at the same time, I would say, realistic as to what can be achieved, pragmatic.
Yes. And
Yes.
we should not be cynical about our journey towards decarbonization, but we need to be realistic.
Professor Arima, thank you very much
you.
for joining us for this podcast. Chief Sustainability Officer for JOGMEC. We look forward to seeing you at
Me too.
CERAWeek in Houston.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on the CERAWeek podcast. To stay connected with the ideas driving change across energy and technology, subscribe, share, and rate this episode. It helps us get the word out. Let's continue having impactful conversations. I'm Atul Arya. Until the next time.
The CERAWeek podcast with Atul Arya is brought to you by CERAWeek, the world's premier energy conference. Be part of the conversations moving the world of energy forward. March 23rd through 27th, 2026 in Houston. Discover more at CERAWeek.com.